Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon. I'm here with Jake Ziegler. On Never Did It, we look at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. And today, the year we're looking at is 1981. Actually, it's funny we say 100. It's over 100 now. We're taking such our sweet time getting through these 100 years. Like next week, we're doing a Halloween episode instead of a year. It's taking us way more than 2 years to get through these 100 years. Like, but whatever. 100 years, 102 years. 100 million years of movie history. Today we're doing 1981, and we've got two very cool, I think, movies to talk about. Why don't we start with the one I recommended for you, which was Son of the White Mare. Now, this is kind of off the beaten path for us. We've done some animation on this show before, but never like the experimental kind of animation that you see here. This is a movie by Marcell Jancovic. Hard to know. It's a Hungarian animator, well known to huge animation geeks and not at all to everyone else. This is a movie about it's a folklore fairy tale about the three offspring of a white horse that are not horses who have to basically, I don't know, go into other worlds to save each other and bring peace to the kingdom, basically. Kill some dragons.
Yeah. Wrestling. There's always there's a lot of wrestling in this movie.
and quite a few dragons that aren't dragons in the way that we think about dragons. So the reason I gave it to you is just because I am a huge animation dork. It's getting to be near the end of the year, which is the time when I go through and try to catch up on lists of animation that I haven't been keeping up on. Like right now, the Oscar animated shorts. I'm back on my DreamWorks tip, and then maybe stop motion also. It's too much. But anyway, this one came up a while back for me. It is, I believe, on the Letterboxd Top 100 Animated Films list, feature films list. I watched it. I watched it again because I wasn't sure what I'd watched. And I liked it. I just think it's really cool and very different from Japanese animation, which we get a lot of, American animation, which is pretty... There's some independent animation that's different, but by and large, American animation is pretty standard at this point. We've got just two main, I think, focal points, like the Beyond the Spider-Verse / DreamWorks is getting into it style and the Disney Pixar style. And this is so different than both of those things. What did you think of Son of the White Mare?
I thought it was really, really cool, and I'm glad you said that about the Japanese style animation and like the American style animation, because I actually wrote that in my Letterboxd review that this was such a unique experience for me to watch, because that's most of what I'm used to. Like, I like animation a lot too, but I'm definitely not as versed or experienced in it as you are, and that's not because I don't want to be. It's just because there's only so much time in a day to watch all the movies in the world. So I was really glad that you had recommended this for me, because it is something outside of my wheelhouse and what I've seen, outside of the a lot of the Japanese things, and maybe some stuff from Europe, United Kingdom especially, and then the American stuff. So yeah, I thought this was really cool. The story is just kind of bonkers, and some of the dialogue, I mean, the translations are pretty funny. What was one of the lines that I wrote down was like when they meet each other, it's like, oh, and we're brothers. Like, all right, great. Well, then they just kind of go off. Like, it's just kind of like, just the way it's translated. I thought was really interesting. And just the animation looks really cool. And yeah, and it's different. And the way the story's told is different. And there's just the way the story kind of progresses. It's very storybook. It's almost like reading a book from a childhood almost. Like, it feels like it's really like reading a book, and it's animated almost that way because it's, it's the early 80s. The animation was a lot more, I don't know if I want to use the word primitive. Like, I don't know if it's like that scaled back, but it's obviously not, not what we're used to today. So I thought it was really cool, and I didn't watch it again yet, but I did rewind several parts of it to watch them again, because I was like, I really liked just how it looked, and I wanted to see it again. I thought it was just really neat in a lot of spots.
What were some of your favorite parts? What stuck out to you?
Well, like I said, all the wrestling I thought was really fun. Like, every time they met, every time they met each other, like, all right, we have to decide who's the strongest, so let's wrestle. And that the results were never challenged either. It's like every time there was a wrestler, it's like, all right, well, you won, you're the strongest, and then you can be our leader. And I loved their names too, Stone Crumbler and Iron Temperer and Tree Shaker. And I loved the princesses too, that every princess had a husband who had progressively more heads, who was going to come and and take them on. Like, it just kind of, I loved the progression of it, that everything got a little bit more dangerous and a little bit bigger as they went along. Until I was going to ask you too if there's any connection, like, did the people who invented Super Mario Brothers like see this movie? Because it's very much about like princesses in a princess in a castle being guarded by dragons, and these guys have to go and slay. Like, is there any connection there at all? I know this came out a few years before Mario Brothers.
Well, it came out a few years before Super Mario Brothers official, like the first game, which came out right around this time. I think actually like yesterday, as of the day that we're recording this, in 1985. but I don't know when Donkey Kong came out, which was where Mario debuted.
Right.
Which may have just been in like 1983, 1984. But as far as I know, there's no connection. I think it's just parallel thinking. Yeah, so that's my favorite thing about this movie is, are the translations correct? Because they refer to these husbands as dragons, but the third one is just like a bunch of buildings. It's like a bunch of skyscrapers. It's really hard to say what the movie's about because it doesn't so much matter what the movie's about. It's just sort of like a psychedelic, but more grounded than like something like El Topo or even this. I recently watched Phantom of the Paradise, which we'll talk about in a little bit because we'll talk about De Palma in a little bit. Those things I think are a little bit more like, woo woo, you should maybe be on drugs when you're watching this. And this is for children, maybe just Hungarian children. One of the funniest things about Marcell Jancovics is he talks about his movies as being for Hungarian people. And I think that critics of his movies contemporaneously and now like latched onto that. They were like, I like looking at this, but I have no idea what the hell's going on. I'm not Hungarian. I don't get it. Luckily, in this one, there's not so much to get, which is why I think it's his most well-known and his most popular. He made 4 feature films. I've seen 3 of them. I watched his first one, which is called Johnny Corncob, which is very much like a nationalist Hungarian movie. Like it takes place in the Middle Ages, but they show the modern Hungarian flag flying throughout it. And it's good, but it's there were times where I was like, oh, that's like weird nationalism that they're promoting here. But it is good, and it was made not too long before, I think like 5 years before this. So it has the same visual style, the same animation style, and it's fun. It's a well-known, I think, Hungarian folktale. This is much more magical, although in Johnny Corncob, he's meeting up with giants to help him cross the ocean. So, but even still, this is more magical. There are no humans, really, in Son of the White Mare. There's just like forces of nature. And then he made a movie, some kind of stag, I don't know, another like nationalist anthology film, which I didn't see and is really hard to find and I've heard is not very good. And then he made a movie that took him 20 years to make called The Tragedy of Man, and I hated that. That came out like 10 years ago, I want to say, and he died kind of recently. And that one just felt like it was so far up its own ass. Everything that bad that's happened on Earth is the fault of the devil, but also religion is fake. I don't know. It's just real like Jordan Peterson. It's not like right wing Jordan Peterson style stuff, but it's real like I'm going to use dragons to explain my bad worldview. It kind of felt like that. The cool thing about Tragedy of Man is because it was made over such a long period of time, as he goes through, it's the entire history of the world. And as he goes through the history of the world, the medium, the artistic mediums that he uses change. And the style, the medium's always animation, but the style changes, which is neat. But it's 2.5 hours long. Yeah. Right. That's too long. So for an animated movie, especially, I'm getting way off Son of the White Mare. It's just funny that like he was pretty cutting edge for a guy whose animation style looks, you mentioned it looks not primitive, but like of its time. It is very much 70s, 80s independent animation, right? It's not like Disney house style. It's not Don Bluth. It's very much like what you would see on public television kind of stuff, which is very cool. Like Jim Henson style animation, which is very neat. I'm so relieved you like it because it could have so easily gone the other way.
Yeah, and I can definitely see. I mean, it's not one that I think would have a mass appeal or anything like that. But I don't know. And even I thought about this too when comparing it like to Mario Brothers. Like the movie almost progresses like a video game, where it's like there's different levels to it. It's like where they beat the 5-headed thing, and then they get the 7-headed thing, and then it's the 12-headed thing or whatever. It's like so it's just like almost like different levels. And I think there's a simplicity to it that way too, where I think we're like kids. It would be very simple for for kids to get. But yeah, I think maybe even for adults, like I think you'd have to be like a certain type of film. I hate to use the word like geek or aficionado or whatever, but like a certain type of like interest in film to seek out something like this, as an adult. But I think you could probably put it on for like kids of a certain age and they'd probably be into it. Well, no, maybe not because of the translation, but just the progression of the story, for Hungarian children, certainly.
As far as I know, none of his movies have ever been translated into English, and probably never will be. Another movie that reminds me of that I like to bring up on this show is Hundreds of Beavers, which is a movie that came out this year, which also is very much like a video game, paced very much like a video game. And I think there's something very satisfying about that. And obviously there is, because millions of people play video games, but it'd be cool to see a video game movie that actually works like a video game. We only see non-video game movies that work that way. Even like the Mario Brothers movie that came out last year and the original Mario Brothers movie, neither of those have the structure of a video game.
Right. Although I don't think I've ever seen the original Mario Brothers. I don't think I watched that when it came out.
It doesn't have the structure of a video game. It has the structure of like Street Fighter, the movie, or Double Dragon, the movie. It's just like throwing a video game up on a screen, basically. And then you gave me Brian De Palma's Blow Out.
I did.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Well, there was a couple of reasons that I wanted to do this movie. Number one, I remember it being awesome. I'm a big John Travolta fan. He was one of my first favorite actors when I first started getting into movies. Also because when I first started getting into movies, I was a big Quentin Tarantino fan. Obviously still am. I'd be very surprised. I haven't read cinema speculations yet, but I'd be very surprised if he doesn't talk about this movie at least a little bit, because I know he was obsessed with Travolta's performance in this movie. So that was how I was actually introduced to it, was just I was obsessed with Pulp Fiction, so I'd hear Tarantino talk about this movie and Travolta in particular. So I remember really loving this movie when I saw it many years ago. Plus, I know we did Blow Up, which I knew I had recommended for you as well. So when I was making the list, I was like, oh, Blow Up, we could do Blow Up and we could do Blow Out, because I know Blowout was inspired by Blow Up. So a number of good reasons to do this movie. And I knew, I was pretty sure I knew that De Palma was a bit of a blind spot for you too. So figured we could just cover a lot of ground with this one. And I was hoping that it would still hold up as a cool movie. And I'm pretty sure that it did.
I thought it was cool. I think it's much more accessible than Blow Up, which I also like, but don't love. Yeah. Do you want to tell us what it's about real quick?
Yeah, definitely. John Travolta plays a guy named Jack Terry, which is just a great masculine 80s movie hero name. He is a sound recorder for kind of B-level horror movies, and he's out doing some sound recording one night, and he records accidentally, or not accidentally, but just coincidentally records a car accident that may turn out to be more than a car accident. In fact, it may turn out to be murder. And the rest of the movie is him trying to unravel this mystery and figure out what is, because the person who was murdered, or was killed in the car accident, was a political candidate. Some would say probably the next president. He was the governor of Pennsylvania, so he was a strong candidate. But also in this car with the woman, as it drove off the road, drove into a creek. There was a woman in the car with his candidate, and John Travolta had Jack Terry dove into the creek, saved the woman, brought her to the hospital, etc., etc. The governor's handlers want to cover this all up, don't want it to be known that there was a woman with him. Kind of a mystery, conspiracy, murder, all kinds of cool stuff going on here.
What I really liked about the movie is they kind of give away the mystery early on, and then the movie becomes a horror movie about how likely is it that John Lithgow is going to be able to kill all the people he wants to kill. Because John Lithgow is the fixer for the people who they actually didn't want the governor to die. They wanted to blackmail him and have political power over the new president by blackmailing him with this affair. Instead, Lithgow, who turns out to be a total psychopath and way off the rails of what they knew they were getting into, is well, killing him was my contingency plan, and so now that's worked, and now I'll just kill everyone else involved. And it really becomes almost like a No Country for Old Men style. He's just going to wipe everyone out. And I thought it was cool that the genre shifted that way, because it starts very similar to Blow Up in that Travolta is doing the very, it's very meticulous, the way that he records sound, very similar to the way that the guy in Blow Up recorded or took photographs. And then it doesn't become about that at all. And so you have two parallel movies. You have Travolta, who's become a paranoid lunatic trying to get to the bottom of a mystery that we already know the answer to. And then the more compelling thing is Lithgow is targeting Nancy Allen, who is sort of a De Palma muse. She shows up a lot in his movies. And she's playing this role so funny. I thought this was her real voice, because this was the first movie I ever saw her in. And she's playing it like Betty Boop. And and then I watched Carrie, and that's not her voice. That's wild. She's so good. Yeah, and I thought Lithgow was great as his, just vile villain, basically serial killer. He becomes a serial killer as the movie goes on.
Yeah, and he's not even shy about his plans at all. He's very matter of fact about the way he's going to do, about the way he lays it all out too. It's it's a really cool performance from him, really early. I don't know, I'm sure it wasn't his first movie or anything, but it's pretty early, I think.
He was in All That Jazz right before this, 2 years before this, but he had only been in a handful of movies before that.
Yeah, All That Jazz, that's another big never did it for me.
Me too, but let's hopefully get to it on this show, because I want to watch it. I'm very happy you suggested it, and it did get me into a bit of a Brian De Palma rabbit hole. I sank into and discovered he's not my favorite director. He is very much, for me, middle of the pack, especially as far as class of director goes, him, Scorsese, Coppola, Spielberg, all those guys kind of broke at the same time. He's probably my least favorite, because after this I watched Carrie, which I thought was good but not great, and I'm in love with Sissy Spacek, and even still. And then I watched Phantom of the Paradise, which I mentioned. I rewatched Scarface, which I still think is very middle of the road gangster movie. It's
I've
so
never seen that.
long.
That never did it for me.
Honestly, don't bother. I mean, maybe bother because everyone's like, oh, Scarface. But it shocks me that it's rated. Like, I get that it's popular, but I'm surprised that it's acclaimed. Tony Montana has like no conflict with himself. So the movie is just like, what will his rage beget? And that goes on for almost 3 hours. That's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And Pacino's accent is so bad.
Yeah.
And it's still Pacino in brownface. I feel like people are not confronting this. Very few actual Cubans in this movie. Anyway, so I haven't seen Body Heat, and I haven't seen, what's his other like real big erotic thriller?
Dress to Kill, Body Double.
Yeah. Oh, Body Double, not even Body Heat. So I haven't seen Body Double, and I haven't seen Dress to Kill. And people really love those movies. But given how I feel, I mean, for me, I think at this point, Blowout is my favorite De Palma movie.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for me too. Like I've seen, my thing with De Palma too is I think I said to you was like, oh, I think De Palma's a little bit of a blind spot for me. And then I looked up, this thing on Letterboxd, like, oh gosh, I've seen 7 of his movies, so that's not a lot given that he's directed a bunch of movies, but it was more than I realized when I looked at it. But then when I looked at it, it's funny, like some of the ones that I haven't seen are the ones that like everybody has seen. Like I haven't seen Scarface, I haven't seen Carrie, I haven't seen Carlito's Way, I haven't seen Dress to Kill or Body Double or Casualties of War. But the ones I have seen is some of his more recent stuff. Obviously I've seen the first Mission Impossible, Blowout, obviously we're talking about. I saw The Untouchables a long time ago. I remember really liking that. But then I've seen some of his more recent output, and I mean recent relatively speaking, like the time like when we were in high school on, like I saw Snake Eyes, and that's pretty bad. I saw The Black Dahlia, which I think got an Oscar nomination for like cinematography, but it's pretty bad. Saw Femme Fatale with Rebecca Romijn, which I don't think anybody remembers. And I saw a movie called Redacted at the Traverse City Film Festival, which I don't think even like barely came out. I don't think anybody really even knows that. So I kind of have a weird thing with De Palma too, where I feel like at some point I do need to just, like you said, just knock Scarface off the list. Like it's famous enough where I probably should have seen it. Carrie the same way. Like how have I not seen Carrie? So some of these I should probably catch a few more of his movies. But like I said, I like Blowout. I remember liking The Untouchables. First Mission Impossible is pretty good, but I don't think he's like an upper echelon type of director here.
Not for me. I agree though. You should see Carrie, if for no other reason than the cast is crazy. Like Travolta's in that too. SpaceX great. Amy Irving, who was once married to Steven Spielberg, is in it. Nancy Allen is the villain. She's really, really good. So like just for like the cast of people that became super famous in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's cool to watch Carrie as a sort of origin for them. And then of course it's like, well, it's the first adaptation of a Stephen King novel, which for me does very little. I think most Stephen King movies suck. I like Shawshank, and I like The Green Mile.
You like Misery a little bit.
Oh, we're going to talk about that next week. So there are Stephen King movies that I like a lot, but I think most of his horror adaptations have been quite poor. Carrie's not poor. It's actually good. Yeah, you should see it.
In terms of Blowout, is we haven't talked about John Travolta's hair.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you reminded me. John Travolta in Blowout is so hot. I'm like, I am so attracted to him in this movie.
Were you ready to just give it all up?
I mean, sadly, not for modern Travolta. Not sadly, thankfully, not for modern Travolta. But I was like, I've never looked at John Travolta and thought, wow, I get what women see in him. And then I saw Blowout, and I was like, holy crap. Yeah. How did this guy's career fall apart after this? That's crazy. Pretty much after this, he had a pretty big lull where his biggest claim to fame was he was in the Look Who's Talking trilogy.
Which didn't start until like the later 80s.
And then he needed Tarantino to bail him out.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty wild. He's gorgeous in this movie. I mean, so much so that Nancy Allen is like hitting above her weight class in this movie.
And that's saying something.
And she's no slouch.
I think this is a great Travolta performance. I mean, he's kind of hit and miss, with a lot of his movies. He's in a lot of really bad movies, and some of his performances can veer into really pretty bad. But he's good in this. Like just like his progression, his kind of normal guy where he's not stupid, but he's not like brilliant either. Like he's like just smart enough to kind of figure some things out, but needs some help with some other things. And I think he works that balance pretty well.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because he actually is kind of stupid, and he never does figure it out. And now, spoiler alert, he loses. I mean, like, he allows the girl to die. He does kill the bad guy, but he's too late to save her. And then in the end, what's the best he can do? Become obsessed with the scream he recorded, which actually makes is a pretty cool bookend to the movie where it ties back, and he just becomes
Yeah.
like sort of it's pretty gross. He uses her death scream in a B movie. So the commentary on what it means to make films is pretty gnarly. And Travolta, at no point does he know what he's doing, and at no point does he get it right. And he puts her in danger, and then she dies. It's pretty bold, I think, in terms of the way it tells the story.
I do want to mention one other performance in the movie is, and I think you mentioned how much you loved it too, Dennis Franz.
Well, it broke my brain when I saw him. I was like, wait, what the? He doesn't look like Dennis Franz to me. And he did, this guy did not have a big film career. He got into TV. He had immense success with television. And when NYPD Blue ended, he just retired. Genius. What a smart thing to do. He's so good as like the scummy pimp, basically.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I was surprised. Yeah. I like that is Dennis Franz, right?
Yeah, I loved his part. He hit every scene he was in. He was just perfect in it. I loved. Yeah, I got excited when he showed up. It's kind of like the Joe Pantoliano part in Risky Business. Like I could have seen Dennis Franz playing that kind of part, and I got a little bit sad. I was like, hey man, I wish he was in more movies. Because like I think he just he could have offered us a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of Dennis Franz if you want to watch him, just like, binge NYPD Blue. But yeah.
I'd have to see a lot of David Caruso. Well, no, only one season of David Caruso, right? Didn't he do just like one season of that show and then bail?
I didn't know that you were such a David Caruso hater.
I'm not a hater. I just think of it because we watched 40-Year-Old Virgin, just recently, and I laughed so hard at the time when Seth Rogen's teaching Steve Carell how to go talk to Elizabeth Banks, and he's trying to explain it to him. He goes, be David Caruso in Jade. And then Steve, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I just remember David Caruso like trying to have his film career, and it it didn't take off at all, and it's a bummer.
All right, so no, the White Mare, Son of the White Mare, was not watched by American audiences, so no Oscar love for that, no Oscar love for Blow Up. So let's just talk about our favorite movies of 1981. How many do you have?
I have 2 honorable mentions and a top 5.
Okay, I've got no honorable mentions, but a top 10. So kick us off.
My 2 honorable mentions. One is a documentary. It's called The Day After Trinity. I watched it after Oppenheimer came out. I think one of the streaming services like offered it for free or something for a short time after, like right around the time Oppenheimer came out. So it's a cool documentary about Oppenheimer and the day after Trinity. It's pretty much that's what it's about. But cool documentary, definitely worth watching. And then my other honorable mention is the James Bond film from that year, For Your Eyes Only. Pretty good Roger Moore movie. Not a classic Bond or one of the best Bond ones, but it's pretty good, especially like I said, considering it's a Roger Moore, one of his better efforts. And then to just kick off my top 5, my number 5 it's one I haven't seen in a long time. I'd like to rewatch is Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1. There's a gag that you and I say to each other still all the time. It's not NVTS. I still think that's one of the funniest bits in a Mel Brooks movie. And I say that, I even say that to people who probably don't get it. And my number 4 is one we talked about today, Son of the White Mare. Just a really cool animated bit. Thanks for recommending that. Those are the kind of things that I always say like, oh yeah, I want to watch stuff like that. But then like, I don't make myself do it, so thank you for recommending that. I appreciate that. My number 3 is another one we talked about today, Blowout. Really happy that held up. I hadn't seen it in so long, I didn't even have a rating for it on Letterboxd, so I'm glad that one held up. That's my number 3. Number 2 is just a delightful movie called The Great Muppet Caper. I love these early Muppet movies. They're just a joy. I smile all the way through them. And then my number 1 is a pretty obvious choice, but I think still one of the best movies ever made, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Cool. So all of your movies appear in my list, but I've got a few others to mention too. My number 10 is The Road Warrior, Mad Max 2. I wish it was just called The Road Warrior, and I wish the third one was just called Beyond Thunderdome, because I love the idea that this series has movies that are campfire tales about a guy that aren't actually connected to each other. And it works better if they're not numbered. But that's so meta. It doesn't matter. Anyway, this is a cool one. It's the blueprint for Fury Road. It's mostly a big chase. It's not as cool as Fury Road, but not even by a long shot. But, Lord Humongous is a cool villain. And there's a lot of really fun stuff in here if you can stomach Mel Gibson, which I know some people have a problem with. My number 9 is Michael Mann's Thief, starring Scott Caan's dad. Great heist movie, very slow burn. If you're into the Scarface aesthetic, this is a good one with mostly just Scott Caan's dad being a real jerk to a lady and wanting to rob a safe and being like a safe cracker. It's cool, but it's real slow. It's a Michael Mann movie. It's pretty slow. My number 8 is History of the World Part 1. Yeah, I think this is, for me, it's one of my favorite Mel Brooks movies by a lot. I rewatched it recently when History of the World Part 2, the Hulu miniseries, came out. NVTS Nuts, yes, it's wonderful. I also love the entire Inquisition song is so funny. I say a lot of times that you can't torque him out of anything. And the problem with this movie is that the first the first bit is really funny. The everything in ancient Rome is really good. The Inquisition's really good. And then you get to the third bit, which is just like, I couldn't remember any of it. And it's because it's not that funny. So that's why it's 8 on my list and not like 2, even though for me it was like a seminal comedy growing up. My number 7 is The Great Muppet Caper. I also like it a lot. I think of like my top Muppet movies. This might be number 4 after the Muppet movie, The Muppets, and Muppets Take Manhattan. But I really like the Muppets, and this is a really good one. I mean, 4 is high. There's a ton of Muppet movies. So
yeah, those three above it are all. I mean, I love all 3 of those too. So yeah, no argument there.
This one was actually directed by Jim Henson. I highly recommend Jake, if you haven't seen it, and anyone listening, if you haven't seen it, to watch the Jim Henson documentary that was directed by Ron Howard. It's on Disney Plus right now. Really good, and gives you a sense of like what he was going through when he was still making the movies and the shows and being kind of a rock star. Also, I just saw, you saw it too, Saturday Night. And his character is very funny. I see people mad about his character in Saturday Night because he's getting crapped on, but it's like, that happened, man. They weren't nice to him.
Yeah. Yeah. They were dicks.
And I don't think the movie like makes him look like a fool. If anything, it makes the people who are mean to him look like dicks.
Yeah. That's how I took it.
People are weird. Saturday Night rules, by the way.
Yeah, very good.
My number 6 is Blowout. The more we talk about it, the more I think I like it. In fact, when we were talking about just the way that the scream, the final death scream at the end, comes back around to the scream that they couldn't get right in the beginning of the movie, and that comically throughout the movie, his producer like still can't get right no matter who he auditions for the role. That's a very cool tag at the end of the movie, even though it's something that was funny throughout the movie made very tragic at the end.
Yeah, it's a bold ending. I've kind of compared it to it's not similar in execution, but similar I think in guts to. I used the word guts when we talked about 5 Easy Pieces. I think it's a pretty gutsy ending to tack that on the way he did to this movie.
Yeah, I'd say even more so because this. I mean, like in both cases, your hero becomes a scumbag. In 5 Easy Pieces, he's been a scumbag the whole time. In Blowout, you're discovering he's a bad person at the end, or maybe this experience made him a bad person.
Or he's just he's so tortured now. He's like he right. Kind of he lost a part of himself.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, great movie. Maybe I underrated.
I actually it more the more we talked about it, and I liked it a lot to begin with.
Yeah. My number 5 is Isao Takahata movie that a lot of people haven't seen. I don't know if it's easy to watch even. Actually, I think it's quite difficult. It's called Chi the Brat. So it's an early Takahata movie. Takahata would become famous for directing Grave of the Fireflies and Only Yesterday, which we've talked about on this podcast. One of the greatest animators of all time. One of the greatest animation filmmakers ever. Chi the Brat's really fun. It's about a spunky little girl who has a deadbeat dad, and her being verbally abusive to him because he's such a deadbeat, and sometimes going to see her mother who abandoned them. It's really good. Takahata, man, you cannot say that Takahata is better than Miyazaki. I mean, they were partners, right? But I will say, I wish more people gave Takahata credit for making like really grounded animated movies that hit really hard. Like maybe not like Pompoko, which is really weird and about raccoon testicles, but Chi the Brat and Gouch the Cellist, like these are great early like 80s animated films that no one talks about that I think deserve a lot more attention. So hopefully this helps in that regard. My number 4 is one I just watched for the first time recently so I could have a top 10, An American Werewolf in London, which I wound up loving. This is a movie is filled with Jewish symbolism about like the strangers in a strange land aspect of being Jewish, about 2 Jewish kids who go to London and are attacked by a werewolf, and what being in a foreign place during this ordeal does to the one who survives. Although you don't lose the one who died, he shows up as a zombie throughout the movie, or a ghoul, or a ghost. I don't know. It's also quite funny. It's very violent for how funny it is. Well worth checking out. One of John Landis's better movies. He's made a lot of clunkers and done some bad things in the industry, but this is a great contribution to movies. My number 3 is Son of the White Mare. If you want to get into European animation, which has been around forever. Like the Czechs and the Hungarians, like they have been doing it since the beginning. They're like pioneers in it. This is a good entry point and one of the more entertaining and accessible ways to do it, even though it's pretty out there. My number 2 is an Albert Brooks movie, Modern Romance. Not his best movie, but maybe his second best movie, maybe third. I don't know. It doesn't touch, for me, Defending Your Life, but it gets pretty close. About a very dysfunctional, just about, what a surprise, it's about Albert Brooks and being in a dysfunctional relationship.
You don't say.
It's extremely funny. And it's just great to watch him deteriorate, want to get rid of this woman, want her back, want to get rid of her, be jealous of her, get married to her, have the marriage immediately dissolve. It's pure, like, mainline Albert Brooks. I think even though you didn't like Real Life, I still think you would really like Modern Romance. And then my number 1, just like you, is Raiders of the Lost Ark. I am not the biggest Indiana Jones guy, but this movie is undeniable. So
I watched it with my kid recently too, and she really liked it too, which is still, I mean, if it's still resonating with 12-year-olds today, I mean, it's like I said, undeniable. It's an all-timer.
You can see my wife in the background. I'm actually not allowed to talk badly about Indiana Jones movies in this house. Oh, she just said correct. Like we went and saw Dial of Destiny, and she liked it way more than me, and I just did not talk about it because she gets so mad at me.
I liked that one. I liked it okay.
I did not. But I'm a Crystal Skull defender, so I think there is
too.
merit.
I don't think it's like a great, anything, but like I think people who crap on it are like, for I don't understand it. There's a lot of reaching.
Yeah, me too. But I think with Dial of Destiny, I could feel that it wasn't a Spielberg movie. So maybe there was some of that happening too. And I like James Mangold.
Obviously,
But
yeah.
Okay, that'll do it. We'll be back next week with a special Halloween episode where Jake teaches me to watch more horror movies and I make him watch something really gross.